Welcome back to the podcast.
Nathan, it is good to see your face, brother.
Excited to be back on. Wanted to check in and see how you're doing post daylight savings time. I mean, it's beautiful outside.
It is
feels like
gorgeous.
we've gotten past the long nights of winter. But how are you feeling like as far as like sleep? Does that hit you hard?
You know, it really doesn't hit me that hard. And oddly enough, I don't know if your body works this way or your brain.
Yeah.
When sometimes I'll wake up really early, 4:30, 5
Yeah.
o'clock, and I'll feel fairly ready to get up. Like, all right,
Yeah.
I can get up. And if I decide to go back to sleep, even for an hour,
Yeah.
then I try to get up and I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
So sometimes daylight savings change actually is helpful to me.
Okay.
And I feel a bit more awake to wake up early. As weird as maybe I'm tapping back into the early days of having young children.
You're just like an Energizer bunny.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
There's just something in my brain that pops me out of sleep. So
I love that. Well, let's dig into the sermon. Man, like it was on fire on Sunday. It was just, I feel like you didn't leave a stone unturned. Like you just were willing to dig into the hard conversations. And so it was a heavy sermon. Like there was a lot of weight. There was a lot of heavy things said, but heavy in a good way. But I would love for you to just give us a quick recap of the sermon, just for anyone that wasn't there, or just for anyone that needs just kind of a refresh of what happened.
you bet, Nathan, I'd love to. The sermon was titled Take It to Heart.
Yeah.
It was largely about death and grief.
Yeah.
And the second half of Ecclesiastes, it's a 12-chapter book. So we finished the first 6 chapters as of last Sunday. And then yesterday, we started into chapter 7. So we'll be in the second half of the book now. And our teacher talks a lot more about grief and death in the second half of the book. And the reason is after the first half, walking us through thinking, how do we understand this world with wisdom?
Yeah.
How do we live life under the sun in our relationships, the way we think about ambition, money, repetition,
Yeah.
all sorts of things? He's going to point out over and over that having one foot in the grave, so to speak, is the only way to know how to posture your other foot in life in a
Yeah.
way to help you make good decisions. And that theme is going to come up again and again. So, but I think probably the thing that perhaps caught people off guard in a good way a little bit is in our cultural climate, Nathan, I think the more that someone would think about death, disease, things like that, that maybe they would assume this means life is going to be gloomier.
Yeah. Yeah.
That my attitude and my emotional posture is going to be darker. But what this book is teaching us is if you want more light in your eyes and less pride in your heart, think more about your death from the angle of God's plan and who the Lord is. And I think that really shone through in the text yesterday.
Yeah.
And there's even brighter visions of that as we work through the rest of this book. So take it to heart. It's right from the text where he says that, I think it's in verse 2, to be in the house of mourning is wiser to be in the house of feasting. All mankind goes to death, and you should take that to heart. That's the heart of the sermon.
Yeah. So good. You mentioned in the sermon that we as Christians should sit in our grief. You mentioned that it's wise to go to the house of mourning and to allow ourselves to sit there, that the fool is the one that wants to kind of accelerate their way out of it. And then even later in the sermon too, you mentioned that whatever we don't process and heal from, like it's gonna eat us up. And even we see that like scientifically. There's a book, The Body Keeps Score, that if we don't process through these griefs that we experience, it's actually going to harm us spiritually long term. It's going to harm our relationships, and it even can cause chronic disease because our body has to put that grief somewhere. My question is that when we're in really heavy grief, maybe someone's going through a divorce, they've lost a family member, maybe they're experiencing some type of health crisis, that can become all-consuming. I mean, it is all-consuming. When you are in that spot, it is your world, and everything else is kind of just an accessory to it, like your job, all of these things. So we don't want to distract or numb ourselves from that season. But how do we kind of balance walking through that season well while not becoming obsessed with that grief? Because it can become where it's like, it's just so heavy. So sometimes it can be a God honoring thing to be like, you know what, like tonight, like I'm not going to process it. Like I am going to turn on a show and allow myself just to not be in this right now. Or I'm going to find like a spot that like I'm going to enter into this grief and process it and then enter back out. So can you kind of walk us through maybe what does it look like to not try to accelerate our way out of it, but also not become consumed by it?
Really good. That's great. And so, some of that was baked in the sermon, but I think it's a good question, Nathan, because it allows me a moment to nuance a little bit of what we saw in the text and apply it specifically to this question. So the first few verses, I think up through verse 6, would be answering the question of how do I sit in my grief well? How do I not just accelerate past it?
Yeah.
And so you have those warnings there about if you don't learn, if you're not trained by being in the house of mourning, then you could become someone who only wants to hear the song of fools
Yeah.
and never receive the correction or rebuke of a wise friend.
Yeah.
Or that even more arresting image of the thorns that are cackling under a pot.
Yeah.
And they burn out immediately. This image of a person whose laughter and joy is only skin deep because it's all built on their circumstances. And the moment their circumstances turn bad, they're all burned up. And that's a result of someone not sitting in their grief,
Yeah.
lamenting well. Now, on the other hand, how do we not become obsessed with this or totally driven by it or dominated by it? I think those 4 following Proverbs in 7, 8, 9, and 10
Yeah.
about how we often suppress reality through grief. We either, in suppressing reality, Nathan, that could mean either that I am suppressing reality to not feel grief,
Yeah.
or I'm suppressing reality to not process grief correctly, which could include just living in it.
Yeah.
And so those images, right, of in verse 7 was money. Money is one of the ways that I can suppress reality. And so perhaps if I have money, I could use it just to avoid grief. Let's just buy happiness. Let's buy joy. Let's buy things. But if you have lots of money, you could also stay locked in your grief.
Yeah.
I don't have to get back to work.
Yeah.
I don't have to work. I have money to allow me to just stay in this state of paralysis because of my grief. The second one was on patience. So grief processed well and understood rightly before the eyes of God helps us determine and differentiate what is really worth my time and what is not. And so if something is worth my time, I'll suddenly have, if I realize it's worth my time, I'll have patience to stay in it. But if either running from grief or being obsessed with grief is causing me to suppress reality, I'm going to find that I don't have patience for good things and I'm just constantly giving myself to just trifles all the time.
Yeah.
You know? But I liked your point. Nathan, there is a good point here that this isn't, we are human. We are created in the image of God. God is not one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Right? God is he's an emotion. He's a person. He's emotional. And so, are there moments where we just think, you know what, let's just go out to dinner somewhere and not think about anything right now and just enjoy a meal and laugh and look at the game on the TV? You bet.
Yeah.
That's really good and healthy, And there's moments for deeper prayer. And I think there's even moments for things like last night, Connor and I, he was turning toward going to bed. He was driving last night.
What?
He has his learner's permit.
Okay.
It was his second time driving at Hartman Arena.
Yeah.
And I talked him into, let's drive from Hartman Arena to Leakers at 61st and Broadway. He did a great job. And we got out and we were walking in the store and he's like, Dad, my legs almost feel numb. Like, why do they feel numb? And he's like, I'm just kind of shaken up about driving a car. I was like, son, I understand. I remember the first time I drove too. Well, later that night, I had YouTube on my phone and we were watching like these hardware hacks, like how to build things or whatever.
Yeah.
Is there a time and space to sit down with your son and just stare at YouTube hardware hacks and be like, that's interesting? Sure.
Yeah.
But if that is all that my life is,
Yeah.
if I am just dominated by being like a rabbit chasing just whatever, and there's
Yeah.
not like this deep-seated regular patience of doing something, that's a sign I'm suppressing reality,
Yeah.
either by avoiding grief or living in grief. The third one was on anger, anger, bitterness, resentment. And the last one was on looking for the mirage of a golden age.
Yeah.
You know, so to your question, brother, if someone is trying to figure out, how do I balance not running from my grief, but also not just getting locked in my grief? I think those 4 Proverbs in chapter 7, verses 7, 8, 9, and 10, show 4 different ways that we commonly try to suppress those things. I think those are good tests
Yeah.
to just help a person know, am I getting outside of the boundary here?
Yeah.
You know, am I ending up way too on one side or the other and not walking in kind of a balanced way of life? So maybe that's a helpful way for someone to think that through.
Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. The second question I have is, you talked about that we should have a healthy vulnerability when we talk about grief, so that if we aren't processing it, we just kind of bury it, we try to ignore it, it's going to eat us up. We kind of touched on that a little bit earlier, but that when we share with people, we can start giving the comfort that God's given us to others, and can become our mission. What does that look like practically for most people? Because when I hear mission, I kind of think of the person that's like went through this really hard thing, and then like they're writing like a book about it, and they have like a podcast about it, and like, you know, this like big ministry, and it's like their life mission to do that, which is awesome. And God calls some people to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the majority of people are all going through hard things, and we're not going to all write a book about it probably, and we're not going to all like get on stage and talk about it. So what does that practically look like to know when to maybe share something that's hard with somebody? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. It's such a good question.
Yeah.
You know, Paul was missionary par excellence, right? Incredible missionary. You can tell.
Can you explain
Yes.
what that means?
Yes. Par excellence is a French phrase to say that he is the best version of something.
Okay, cool.
Right. So I really love Dempsey's burgers and fries. I would say that's burgers and fries par excellence.
Okay, cool.
It's sort of the top edge of it, right? So
90% of people are probably going to know what that meant, but I'm just going to take the fall and ask for the 10%.
I
that
love
don't.
you doing that. I love that. Yes. So Paul, if you want to know what it is to be a Christian missionary, you look at the Apostle Paul, right? He, after his conversion on the Damascus Road, he was so completely devoted to planting churches, to sharing the gospel of Jesus, and to seeing Christianity change the world. So committed, you know, you read 1 Corinthians chapter 7 about marriage, and he's the one who's famously saying, listen, if you're single and you're not just like burning in passion to get married to someone, just stay single. So you don't have the troubles of marriage, and you can focus your life on serving and loving and enjoying the Lord, you know? Gosh, Paul was such a missionary.
Yeah.
So if we were to ask the question, okay, Paul's whole life is committed to spreading Jesus. So then maybe we'd think, if I read Paul's letters, he's going to avoid talking about personal things.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be theology and teaching. You know, I'm going to read Paul's letters, and he's going to say, let's not talk about me. Let's not talk about my personal story. Let's not talk about those things, because that's just, you know, my life and somebody else's life, and that's not very helpful. So let's just teach you theology and dig into Christianity. That's not how Paul did it. You know, so in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, which wasn't even in my manuscript at all. That was just extemporaneous yesterday as I was preaching. Just felt the Lord leading that as I was in that space in the sermon. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul provides a level of self-disclosure
Yeah.
that is not only rare, I would say it's countercultural to a lot of Christian subculture.
Yeah.
Because for if you're trying to cement Christianity as the religion, you're trying to convince people to convert, and then you say, Paul says, I follow Jesus, I love Jesus, I've devoted my life to Jesus. But then he said, his exact words are, at least in the CS, the Christian Standard Bible, I do not want you to be unaware brothers and sisters
Yeah.
of the trial we
Yeah.
recently faced. And he mentions in this trial that they despaired of life. That means they didn't want to live, man.
Yeah.
That's what that means. I mean, he's literally saying, emotionally speaking, I woke up in the morning, I didn't even want to live. I was despairing of life. And then he says, it felt like the sentence of death was upon us.
Yeah.
Which is to say, like, it felt like God, my loving Father, the judge of the world, feels like he's just sentenced us to death, is what it felt like. But then he says he delivered us and he will deliver us. And so he's still giving trust in the Lord. But as the chapter goes on, he starts explaining it. He starts giving theological categories for it. So he basically says, we were afflicted by God so that we would be comforted by God. We've been comforted by God so that we can share the comfort we received from him with you. And so the comfort that God has given us in our trial, we're going to give you in your trial now. And so Paul is essentially doing this deep vulnerability with other believers. And this vulnerability is part of mission.
Yeah.
He's being vulnerable for the sake of showing how in those trials, even in knowing Jesus, these types of trials can happen in your life. But God still met me and delivered me and comforted me in them. And now I want to comfort you. So in this idea of being trained by grief,
Yeah.
of being in the house of mourning, not just staying in the house of feasting, and learning how to have one foot in the grave so I know how to get the posture right on my other foot in life. If you're going to be trained by grief, it's not just going to be our own grief, but the grief of others, of other brothers and sisters. So I would say, Nathan, Paul's vulnerability is so wise. And, you even think through, he talks about the thorn in his flesh, but he never tells you what that is exactly. What is this thorn in the flesh?
Yeah.
Some theologians think, well, maybe he dealt with physical blindness off and on the rest of his life because of the Damascus Road encounter. Or, maybe it's some sort of a besetting sin that he kept fighting and leaning. We have no idea.
Yeah.
And then when he says that he despaired of life, he doesn't get into every single detail. He doesn't talk about suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
We don't even know if that was a part of it.
Yeah.
If that was there. So now maybe Nathan, in his very intimate friendships with Timothy, with Barnabas, even John Mark later after their dispute when they became close again, maybe when they were one-on-one in person and they're sitting around a fire and they're talking, maybe in those moments Paul is doing even deeper self-disclosure. And he's asking these brothers for very specific prayer about this thorn in the flesh, and he's naming it to the nth degree. But there in the Bible, as he's writing to other Christians, he's not being dishonest. He's not hiding it behind a veil of just clean, clear-lined theology. He's being vulnerable, but it's this appropriate, wise vulnerability that's naming the truth, but it's not setting the standard that he's inviting everyone in the world to see all the contours of the most intimate parts of his life. Nonetheless, I think this vulnerability, brother, is a part of what Christian communities have to do if we're going to be trained in grief together.
I think even you could kind of talking about the circles of sphere, like you don't share necessarily unless God's called you with like the whole, like every single person in the world, like, but really having the wisdom to know, like, these are like my people that like I know I can trust like what they say and like are going to walk alongside of me. That's like my close circle that I can have that vulnerability with. And then like your spheres as they go out, it's like maybe it changes as each sphere goes out. So I appreciate that explanation. In the sermon, you mentioned that outside of Christianity, you really aren't able to think. Like you have to walk around with a sense of deadening the reality of the world. And that feels like what the real spiritual battle that's happening out there is, that the devil is suppressing the truth and kind of trying to distract everyone before coming to Jesus with the next shiny thing. Like, don't think about that there's an afterlife. Don't think about that you are going to die someday. Don't think about like who created you, where do you stand with them. So can you talk more about that?
I would love to. Man, you are saying something that's near and dear to my heart in terms of helping people wrestle with why Christianity is so inviting for someone who wants to think deeply. So if you think about some of the songs or movies or music that can have pretty strong messages in our culture, Nathan, there's sometimes this narrative of, like in a love story, the narrative will be, as long as we're in love, as long as we're feeling this for each other, let's be all in. But let's also be okay with the fact that when that goes away, this just has to end. That is unbelievably scary.
That's like the whole point of La La Land. Have you seen that movie?
I have not seen that movie, no. But that's the point. That's basically the point of it. I know there's. I'm trying to think. I've heard this in music. I've seen it in so many movies, and I can't name one right now. But it's almost this idea of, let's just not think about it. Don't think about it. You know, things are good right now. We're feeling the chemistry. We're connected. Life is great. Let's be all in. And then let's be honest when suddenly one of us decides this doesn't feel right anymore. And maybe it's the universe telling us it's time to move on and go find a new person to do something with. And so music and movies and culture sort of vaunts this as, you know, beautiful and wonderful and great aesthetics. But if you slow down, it's basically a way of life that says you're never going to be happy if you think too much. Don't think. You just have to live in whatever the feeling is and wake up every morning. And if you really like this person or you like this season of life, you just got to understand it might all be pulled out from you in a moment. That's just life. Just don't think about it and you'll be fine. That is not Christianity at all. So this caught my attention. I'm not great at Greek. I can't speak Greek. I can't read Greek, but because I'm a pastor in the 21st century, I have tools that I can look at Greek and study as I'm writing sermons. I do believe the word is theoretzo. It's where we get our word to theorize or theoretical. The Bible says that when, I believe it's Peter in one of the Gospels, is running to the empty tomb. After the women come to the disciples, they say, the tomb is empty. Jesus is risen. He's not there. The disciples run. I think it's Peter who outruns John. Maybe in John's Gospel it is. And he's the first one to look in. And he looks in and he gazes at this empty tomb. The Greek word that is given to explain what was happening in Peter's heart and mind is the word theoretzo. He was theorizing. He was theoretically thinking through what could have happened. How is this tomb empty? Where is he? In other words, it's teaching that he's thinking. He's trying to think this through. You know, later when Jesus appears to doubting Thomas, and Thomas is, he's saying, I don't think I'd believe unless I could put my fingers in his wounds and really see him. And then Jesus appears among them. And Thomas says, my God and my Lord. And Jesus says, you know, blessed are you for believing, but more blessed are those who believe and do not see. Well, Jesus is not saying believe and do not see means I'm not going to think about it and just someone gives me a nursery rhyme about Jesus and now I'm a Christian. But Jesus is saying those who are going to dig and think and process and apply. And so Ecclesiastes is showing us, Nathan, there is a way of living in this world that you can think deeply about death. I mean, for example, you and I, brother, we could think about what would it be like to die with cancer? And let's even pick a real painful cancer. What's the chemo like? What's the radiation like? How many nights do we spend alone at the hospital looking at the moon through the blinds after our family goes home? And what books are we going to read? What music will we listen to? How will we manage the pain? How will we treat the nurses and doctors? We can think about all that because Christianity has freed us to understand and know and believe we're all appointed to death once. It's going to happen. We are going to die, but we're going to live forever. Once we die, we are going to live forever. We're going to open our eyes in eternity with the Lord Jesus. To be away from the body is to be with the Lord, is what Paul teaches. So we're actually freed to slow down and think about dying and then to use that as fuel to live with purpose today. and to change the way I interact with people and my wife and my children and the things around me and the church and whatever else because of the fact I know I'm going to die at some point. And then also in Christianity, you have covenants and you have relationship. Marriage in Christianity is very different from the world. It's not just a feeling, it's a covenant you make with someone. That's why classical Christian vows, you're not vowing what you're going to feel forever. You're vowing what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And you're saying to this person, I am making a future appointment with you that here in 50 years, if I'm still alive, I'm still going to be right here.
Yeah.
And so it's not just this sense of, well, don't think about it.
Yeah.
Don't think about it. Just let it be. And if you want to be happy, just life's going to happen. You got to roll with it.
Yeah.
That's just not what the Bible gives. And I think the enemy, Nathan, does a great job of making people believe and think that what the Bible is offering is the thing that's unsure. This capricious, mysterious God who knows what he's going to do to you.
Yeah.
Who knows what suffering or brokenness is. Just delete God and you see what you get. And that's way more predictable. That's way more safe. That's way safer. But that is not what you get when you really think about it.
Yeah.
So I really do believe, brother, that if someone wants to have a life of really thinking things through, I don't think you can do it without Christianity.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose you could, but you're going to have to do a whole bunch of intellectual cartwheels.
Yeah.
You're almost going to have to create these versions of yourself that you're able to compartmentalize. That when I'm with this person, I'm just not thinking.
Yeah.
And then maybe later I can have these deep introspective moments that I'm full of sadness and mourning about the fact that I have no idea or any assurances of where my life is going. But then I have to know how to turn that right back off when I go out into the world so I don't carry this gloomy Eeyore type attitude everywhere I go.
Yeah.
Man, I think the gospel is the only thing that frees us from that.
Yeah. I liked when you mentioned the faith aspect, that the devil does such a good job of making Christianity seem like it's like this ambiguous thing. But the reality is it's any belief system that we take on, and we all take on some type of belief system, it all takes faith.
Yes.
Like you're hedging your bets on this life that's full of, I'm just going to go from the next thing that feels right to the next thing that feels right to the next thing that feels right. And hopefully that satisfies me.
Yep.
And hopefully when I get to the end, that was the right decision. And if you follow Jesus and you're going to say, like, I'm going to cast everything onto him, I'm going to lay everything at his feet, and I'm going to hedge my bets on him, that also takes faith.
Amen.
But in that faith, you can truly have the freedom that you're talking about to think and to stare death. Like that's the freedom that comes from walking with Jesus, that you can stare death in the face. You can stare at the hard things in life and be okay. And you don't have to compartmentalize. I know before I became a Christian, I knew about God. I knew about hell. I knew about like God's holiness, his righteousness. And I spent, before I became a Christian, there was a period of 5 years where I knew those realities to be true, but I didn't know how to become a Christian.
Yeah.
And like, I didn't know like how to reconcile the reality of my life with the reality of God's holiness and his righteousness. And I truly had to compartmentalize things. Like in order to be okay, I had to try to not think about those realities. I was always trying to push them down, and I was always trying to create like a different version of myself. But then every single night that I would lay my head on the pillow, because I would distract myself all day and I would find a way to like be okay. Every single night I would have to lay there, and while I was trying to fall asleep, recognize who I actually was, and also recognize like I don't have this figured out, and like I'm living another day with the reality of this God that I don't know, and I couldn't escape it. Like it was a reality where like it was a reality where I was always running, and every single night it was like I couldn't fall asleep. Sometimes I would make myself sick just from like worrying about it so much. And God met me in that. And that's the cool thing. But it's like I was able to start living fully when Christ entered into that, because I didn't have to have these areas in my life where I couldn't look at them anymore. I could look at every single area of my life, stare it in the face, and be like, I don't like this, but it's going to be okay. So I loved how you talked about the freedom part, the faith aspect. Amazing. So
Thank you, Nathan.
I think that closes out the podcast for today. Appreciate you coming on, talking. We'll dig back in next week.
I love it, my dear friend. Thank you, Nathan.